What's the secret behind the eternity of Ghadeer Khumm's message? Have you ever wondered why, despite all the sensitivity and opposition and passing of more than 1400 years, Prophet Muhammad's peace be upon him sermon at Ghadeer Khumm remains an undeniable and universally accepted event for all Muslims? It's interesting to note that in terms of the number of narrations and the credibility of the resources, Ghadeer Khumm's sermon is unique amongst all the other events of the life of the Holy Prophet. Why is that? Have you ever wondered why? You might say to yourself that the interpretation of Prophet Muhammad's sermon at Ghadeer Khumm later became a subject of division amongst the Muslims and perhaps didn't reach a conclusive ending. Well, this reasoning can be applied to anything. For example, although Muslims agree on the literal text of the Quran, they have differences in interpreting its verses. But these differences in interpretation don't degrade Quran's significance and divinity of its revelation. Surely, the Prophet's wise foresight in the event of Ghadeer Khumm was to ensure that the divine message was fully delivered to the people in the best possible way, just like the Quran, leaving no room for doubt about its occurrence for anyone. Stay with us to explore the secrets behind the eternity of Ghadeer Khumm with a completely scientific approach. I'm sure what you are about to watch hasn't crossed your mind before. The first influential factor that led to the eternity of Ghadeer Khumm's message is the location itself. In the morning of the 18th of Zulhijjah, in the 10th year of Hijri, Angel Gabriel descended upon the Prophet, entrusting him with a significant revelation. A mission that, if left unfulfilled, would make all his efforts in preaching Islam over the past 23 years inconclusive. Following this revelation, while returning from the farewell pilgrimage with a large caravan of Muslims, the Prophet diverted them from the main route between Mecca and Medina, leading them to an isolated pond called Khumm. This detour was about 5 to 6 kilometers long, likely taking more than an hour considering the presence of women and children in the caravan. Since this deviation was sudden and without any prior notice, the Prophet ordered messengers to inform those ahead or behind from the caravan to join the rest of Muslims at Ghadeer Khumm. The caravans off route into an unfamiliar path, the selection of an isolated place for delivering a sensitive sermon, and staying overnight after delivering the sermon for taking allegiance are all crucial psychological factors that the Holy Prophet used to help build a stronger memory of the event. These factors ensured that the Prophet's sermon at Ghadeer Khumm would be eternally ingrained in the minds of the Muslims present at that event. Certainly, if the Prophet had delivered this sensitive sermon in the usual manner at his mosque in Medina, some might have later forgotten or even denied it. However, choosing an unfamiliar location and spending the night there left no room for doubt in the minds of the Muslims, making them absolutely clear that the Prophet had intentionally brought them to Ghadeer Khumm for a special reason related to his delivered sermon. Let me give you a simpler example. If the Friday prayers sermon were to be delivered by the Imam not at the usual grand mosque within the city, but rather in a remote location outside the city, wouldn't that raise questions, curiosity, and interest about the content of the sermon? Moreover, if ever discussed in the future about why their Imam took them to a new remote place, wouldn't this change create a special memory which would help them remember it forever, especially if it was associated with a significant sermon? Wouldn't they remember that location as well as the sermon delivered there forever? Another important point to be noted is that the Prophet diverted the caravan's route without any prior notice, and in response to those who questioned him, he only responded, "O people, respond to the call of Allah, and I'm His messenger." This way, He wanted the people to trust his decision and follow him, understanding the wisdom later. This kept the hypocrites who were hiding among the Muslims unaware of the Prophet's real intention, and so prevented them from planning and coordinating to disrupt the sermon. If the Prophet had delivered this sermon a week earlier in Mecca during the Hajj pilgrimage, it would have faced opposition and interference from the hypocrites and the Quraysh, leading to chaos and then collapse of the great Hajj congregation. The existence of a specific Quranic chapter named the hypocrites alone illustrates the danger that the hypocrisy posed to Islam and the Muslims. It's worth mentioning that the sermon of Ghadeer Khumm is one of the few sermons by the Prophet where most of his companions were present. These companions later played a pivotal role in the political center of Islam in Medina in deciding the succession of the Prophet. Therefore, it was the Prophet's wise planning to gather them all in a remote and unfamiliar place to deliver the revelation and take their allegiance. If these companions had been in the cities of Mecca and Medina, they might have been engaged in other activities or worship during the sermon and later used their distraction as an excuse for not paying attention to the Prophet's sermon. But in the remote desert of Ghadeer Khumm, they had nothing to do except joining the congregation for the noon prayers and immediately after that, listening to the Prophet's sermon. In addition to the location factor, the timing also played a significant role in the long-lasting impact of Ghadeer Khumm's message. Generally, because it occurred so close prior to the Prophet's demise as the sole political and religious leader of the society, it made it more important than his other sermons during his prophethood. However, the Prophet did not just deliver this sermon without preparing the minds of the Muslim community. A week earlier, during his farewell Hajj in Mina and Arafat, he explicitly reminded the Muslims that his time was near. Then he mentioned the hadith of Saghalain, emphasizing that after him, they should hold on to two precious things, the Quran and his progeny, so as not to go astray. Perhaps after hearing this hadith, Muslims might have had many questions and concerns about the future of the Muslim Ummah after the Prophet. Finally, at Ghadeer Khumm, the Prophet introduced and appointed Imam Ali alayhi salam as the complete embodiment of his progeny and his sole successor. This gap of about 1 week between raising the question about what will happen after the Prophet and receiving the answer of who will succeed after him made the reception and understanding of the response more effective and memorable. Another crucial point is the timing of the sermon itself. Historical accounts explicitly state that on the 18th of Zulhijjah in the 10th year of Hijri, corresponding to March 16th of the year 632 in the Christian calendar, was a very hot day, which is consistent with the geographical location and desert climate of that area. Those familiar with the climate of the Arabian Peninsula know how scorching and unbearable the sunshine can be on the desert sands. Now, on such a hot and exhausting day, after performing the noon prayer, the Prophet went to the pulpit under the burning sun to deliver a sensitive and important sermon. Why would he deliver such an important sermon despite the excessive heat? Historical accounts mention that to escape the heat during the Prophet's sermon, Muslims were using half of their cloaks under their feet as something to step on, while using the other half over their heads as shades. Why didn't the Prophet keep the people longer until after the Maghrib and Isha prayers to let the weather cool down a bit before delivering his sermon? The Prophet always considered the well-being of the Muslims, especially the elderly and the weak, so his insistence on delivering the sermon under the scorching sun undoubtedly indicates its importance and necessity. Indeed, there was a great purpose behind the Prophet's decision and why it had to be fulfilled at the earliest opportunity. Another important factor is related to the quality of how the sermon was delivered. The Ghadeer Khumm sermon was one of the most sensitive sermons of the Prophet's prophetic mission. and had elements that distinguish it from the other sermons. One important aspect of this sermon was that the Prophet didn't just deliver the sermon as a one-sided speech, but rather turn it into a back and forth discussion. He sought confirmation from the people at various points during the sermon. These confirmations were both an acknowledgement of full understanding of what the Prophet had said so far and also ensured that the people remain focused to the rest of his speech. The most important of these confirmations was when the Prophet asked the people, أَلَسْتَ أَوْلَىٰ بِكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ? Am I not of higher authority over you than yourselves? To which the people replied, yes. This phrase echoed the 6th verse of Surah Al-Ahzab, which states, the Prophet has more authority over the believers than themselves. Immediately after obtaining this affirmation from the people, he said, مَنْ كُنْتُ مَوْلَىٰ فَعَلِيٌّ مَوْلَىٰ. Whoever I am a master to, Ali is also his master. In this crucial statement, the term Mawla should be interpreted in the same sense as Awla in Alasta Awla bikum min anfusikum, meaning in all religious and political matters. Interestingly, it's worth noting that until today, no Muslim has had any doubt or suspicion regarding the meaning of Awla in Alasta Awla bikum min anfusikum, which means authority in all religious and political matters. Indeed, the Holy Prophet in this sensitive sermon also clarified its interpretation to ensure that it wasn't difficult or ambiguous, and no one would interpret Mawla to mean merely a friend. Of course, there are many other linguistic, rational, and Quranic reasons to refute the interpretation of Mawla as merely a friend, which we don't have time to discuss here. If you're interested in this topic, be sure to watch our other related videos on our website or channel. Audiovisual factors. One of the important technical factors that contribute to the effective reception of a speech for an audience is the auditory and visual elements. Were these elements present and observed in the Ghadeer Khumm sermon or not? Historical records indicate that upon reaching Ghadeer Khumm, the Prophet ordered to make a pulpit equal to his height. After the noon prayer, while the Muslims were still seated in their prayer place, the Prophet, accompanied by Imam Ali, ascended on the pulpit. And during this sermon, Imam Ali's hand was raised to its full height, indicating which Ali the Prophet was referring to as his successor. Raising Imam Ali's hand to an elevation of about 4 meters from the ground allowed everyone, even those farther away, to see it directly and clearly. Perhaps this is why the Prophet didn't postpone delivering the sermon until after the Maghrib and Isha prayers to allow the weather cool down, as it might have been an excuse for some to later claim that they didn't see Imam Ali's hand being raised in the night's darkness. What about the auditory factor? Did everyone directly hear the Prophet's sermon from his blessed mouth, or did some people repeat the Prophet's voice for those farther away, resulting in an indirect hearing for some, giving them an excuse for not hearing the Prophet's voice directly? This is a question that we have answered for the first time in a separate video, using a completely scientific approach by precisely modeling the acoustic wave modeling at the exact location of the Prophet's pulpit in Ghadeer Khumm, demonstrating that everyone undoubtedly heard the Prophet's sermon directly. I recommend watching this video in our channel. Event Commemoration. After concluding the Ghadeer sermon, the Prophet took steps to turn Ghadeer Khumm into a significant religious and divine celebration, ensuring its eternity. At the end of the Ghadeer sermon, the Prophet urged every present individual to convey what they had witnessed and heard to the absentees and to take actions in spreading this divine decree. Truly, the news of this divine appointment had to spread rapidly across the Islamic territory so that everyone would hear it and become committed to it as a religious order. Immediately after the conclusion of the Ghadeer sermon, Angel Gabriel descended, presenting the verse of the completion of the religion to the Prophet. This verse expressed the divine satisfaction with Islam as a religion, which was now being completed upon the declaration of the final decree regarding the succession of Imam Ali. The Prophet's excitement and emotion over this divine satisfaction overtook him with joy, urging the people to congratulate him on this matter. Another important aspect that contributed to the eternity of Ghadeer Khumm's sermon was the use of the day's media. During a time when poetry and poets were powerful media tools in the Arab society, Hassan ibn Sabit, the Prophet's poet, with the permission of the Prophet, composed a poem about the event of Ghadeer Khumm. His poem was the first in a series of poems written throughout history about Ghadeer Khumm and had a significant impact on the dissemination and spread of Ghadeer Khumm among the Muslim community. These poems also served as valuable records confirming this historical event. All previously discussed aspects of Ghadeer Khumm aside, but the most significant action by the Prophet after the Ghadir sermon was to compel all present individuals of Ghadeer Khumm to pledge allegiance to Imam Ali as the commander of the faithful. What an honorable and meaningful title bestowed upon Imam Ali on this day and in this place by the Holy Prophet, and everyone was obligated to say it. Indeed, the stay in the desert of Ghadeer Khumm was prolonged, and the Muslims had to spend the night there to ensure that all individuals, without any exceptions, have pledged allegiance to Imam Ali and have confirmed what they had heard and seen. Interestingly, even women were not exempt from this order and had to pledge allegiance to Imam Ali as the commander of the faithful by placing their hands into a water pan behind a curtain where Imam Ali's hand was placed on the other side of the water pan. Undoubtedly, the Prophet's actions in selecting the location, the time, and the style and the quality of his sermon at Ghadeer Khumm, followed by a grand celebration of the event, were extremely intelligent and impactful, leaving no room for doubt or forgetfulness among any of the Muslims present at Ghadeer Khumm. Every psychological aspect of this matter, even its minor elements, were carefully and cleverly executed by the Prophet step by step. The result was that the Muslims heard the Prophet's sermon with their own ears, saw Imam Ali's hand raised by the Prophet with their own eyes, verbally confirmed the validations that the Prophet sought from them during his sermon, and ultimately sealed their commitment to him with their own allegiance. Although many non-Shia historians and biographers such as Ibn Hisham or Tabari, who precisely documented the life of the Holy Prophet with all the details, deliberately did not mention or record anything about the Ghadir's event when they reach it, pretending that such an event never occurred. However, this event has been cited abundantly in many various narrations and hadith books accepted by all Muslim sects, leaving no doubt about its occurrence. The occurrence of the Ghadeer Khumm's event remains definitive and universally accepted by all Muslims to this day, and perhaps fewer incidents in Islamic history, both in terms of the frequency of narrations and the credibility of the resources, can compare to Ghadeer Khumm's event. Truly, the Ghadeer Khumm's event remains alive after 1400 long years and is still an undisputable and a guiding evidence for the believers who firmly believe from the depths of their hearts only Ali is indeed the commander of the faithful. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in historical topics, especially the history of the Ahl al-Bayt, be sure to follow our website and channel. Take care.